After being reborn, my stepsister stole my jade pendant and accidentally revealed it in public. That's when I knew she had also been reborn. The next day, the matchmaker from the Marquis residence came to our door. Only then did everyone realize that my stepsister was actually the sweetheart the heir had been searching for desperately for 3 years. The heir, disregarding the lowly status of his half-sister, insisted on marrying her as his official wife. The Wen family was merely an ordinary official household, and even being a concubine would have been considered a high match for a half-sister of such standing. The world sighed at the heir's deep affection and marveled at the half-sister's good fortune. They cast sympathetic glances at me, the legitimate elder sister. Little did they know, this was all part of my plan. Hello, everyone. Welcome to my channel. Subscribe us to read wonderful stories every day. Now, the story begins. My aunt was beaming with joy at home. Her daughter was now the future princess consort, and her status naturally rose along with it. As soon as the Marquis's family sent the betrothal gifts, my aunt and Wenyang eagerly summoned me to the main hall. I had just entered the front hall when Wenyang pulled her mother to kneel before father. Father, sister, Yanga has an unreasonable request. Father quickly stepped forward to help them up. What are you doing? We're all family. Speak properly if you have something to say. Wenyang refused to rise, instead turning to face me with a burning gaze. Yanga is now the future wife of the Marquis's heir. If my mother remains a concubine, it would appear that our Wen family is disrespecting the Marquis's household. Therefore, Yanga earnestly requests that sister agree to father promoting my mother to the status of legal wife. I narrowed my eyes and looked at father. His gaze shifted uneasily, and he turned his head away from me. I understood then that he also agreed with this matter. After all, over the years, if it weren't for me, his legitimate daughter of noble birth, standing in the way, he would have long since elevated the concubine to the status of principal wife. If it were the me from my past life, yearning for the pitiful remnants of my father's love, even if unwilling in my heart, I would have agreed, but now, I would not. I slowly knelt down, performed a deep bow to my father, and then turned to Wenyang. Sister, your words shame me greatly. Such an important matter naturally only requires father's consent. However, father has just been promoted to the position of Vice Minister of Rights. If a concubine is elevated to principal wife at this moment, it would surely damage father's reputation. The emperor values propriety and rights. If someone with ill intentions were to seize upon this as a pretext, father valued his official career the most, and upon hearing this, his face immediately darkened. Wenyang was unwilling to accept this and was about to say something more, but she was pulled back by her aunt. Her aunt spoke gently. Just like the image of a quiet and unassuming chrysanthemum she always maintained in father's heart, Yua makes a valid point. Yanga, mother knows you're filial, but your father's official career is the top priority of the Wen family. Father looked at his aunt with approval. You understand me best. Yaonyang, rest assured, I will not treat you unfairly. The concubine gave a shy, delicate smile. Naturally, I wouldn't let them have their way so easily. I spoke slowly. There is just one thing. Yanga is right to be cautious. As the future wife of the heir, she must be careful with her words and actions. A concubine is still a concubine. If others were to hear her addressed as mother, it would surely invite ridicule. I fear it might even bring shame upon father, the Vice Minister of Rights. Wenyang's face, which so closely resembled the concubine's in its delicate charm, instantly turned deathly pale. I then turned to father, who was clearly displeased by my earlier words. As sisters, we share in both honor and disgrace. Would it be appropriate if I write to grandmother tomorrow and ask her to send one of her trusted matrons to teach Yanga the proper etiquette? Father nodded, then turned and left with a flick of his sleeve. After father left, Wenyang snorted disdainfully at me. I, however, lowered my head and chuckled softly. Wenyang thought she had married a good husband, but she didn't know that what awaited her was not a life of wealth and honor, but a hellish nightmare. Grandmother soon sent Nanny Song over. Seeing Nanny Song's much younger face, my eyes couldn't help but grow warm. In my previous life, when I married the heir, grandmother had also sent Nanny Song to be my dowry nanny. Nanny Song taught me how to be a proper wife to the heir and how to serve my mother-in-law. However, she never approved of the concubine and Wenyang, often urging me to keep my distance from them, which inevitably caused me some displeasure. Over time, I grew distant from her and sent her away to the estate. But fortunately, in my previous life, she went to the estate and didn't witness how I was later mistreated by that heir husband. After my death, as my dowry nanny, she came to collect my body and handle my funeral arrangements. The Xinyang Marquis household was adept at putting on a show. Although Matron Song had doubts about the cause of my death, she could find no fault and had no choice but to return to my grandmother. But no one knew that after my death, My soul left my body and lingered in the mortal world for a time. The Xinyang Marquis household publicly claimed that I had died of a sudden illness. To demonstrate the depth of the heir's affection, they even proposed that Wen Yang, who was still unmarried, become his second wife. Wen Yang was naturally overjoyed. As a daughter of a concubine, marrying into a noble family was already difficult for her. With such an opportunity presented to her, she was naturally willing. That was how she came to know that the reason the Crown Prince had sought to marry me back then was simply because he had seen the jade pendant on me and recognized me as his savior. And so, in this life, she schemed to steal my jade pendant. Later, my spirit dissipated on the very day of her wedding to the Crown Prince. When I opened my eyes again, I had returned to the time before the Crown Prince sought my hand in marriage. Wen Yang took advantage of my drunken state after a banquet and stole my jade pendant in the carriage on the way back. She thought she had covered all her tracks, unaware that I was doing it on purpose. Her repeated attempts to probe the jade pendant on me had long since put me on alert. However, the idea of being reborn was so unbelievable that I wasn't sure if Wen Yang was the same, so I deliberately pretended to be drunk to lure her in, and when she actually made a move on the jade pendant, I was finally certain. It seems she didn't know the real cause of my death when she married into the Xinyang Marquis's household in her previous life. Since she's so eager to marry into it again in this life, I certainly won't stand in her way. In fact, I'll even give her a push. I sat to the side, watching as Nanny Song taught Wen Yang the rules of etiquette. Perhaps pushed to the edge by Matron Song, Wen Yang simply plopped down on the floor and pointed at me, saying, "Why doesn't she have to learn?" Matron Song was about to step forward, but I stopped her. I confidently performed the etiquette Matron Song had just taught right in front of Wen Yang. Matron Song cast an approving glance my way, but Wen Yang bit her lip tightly and said, "You must have learned it before." I refused to accept this. I paid no attention, merely walked over and whispered quietly to her, "My sister is right. My mother comes from the Qinghe Kui family, where rules and etiquette are most highly valued. I've been immersed in these customs since childhood, unlike you, who only knows how to learn from your mother how to win a man's favor." Wen Yang trembled with rage, pointing a finger at me. Don't you dare gloat. I am the future wife of the heir to the Marquis now." "Oh, is that so?" I signaled for Nanny Song to leave, then smiled at Wen Yang. "What? The things you only managed to get as a concubine in your past life, and now that I've willingly given them to you in this one, you've forgotten your place?" Wen Yang stared wide-eyed, looking at me in disbelief. I had no intention of hiding the fact that I knew Wen Yang had been reborn. Being reborn is one thing, but it doesn't mean she got a new brain. However, Wen Yang clearly didn't see it that way. After the initial panic, her expression quickly returned to normal. "Regardless, I am now the future wife of the heir to the Xinyang Marquisate. I'm afraid you'll have to find another suitable husband, sister." Wen Yang looked at me with an air of arrogance. "Over the years, although father has favored my stepmother and entrusted her with managing the household affairs, the dowry left to me by my mother remains untouched by her. All she can meddle with are merely the profits from the farmlands and shops. Even though my stepmother has spared no effort in nurturing Wen Yang, providing her with the finest food, clothing, and daily necessities, the deep-rooted heritage of our noble family is undeniable. Wen Yang has always harbored resentment over this matter. Well then, I shall take this opportunity to wish you and the heir a harmonious union and a lifelong bond. Dear sister." I gave a slight bow, cast a meaningful glance at Wen Yang, and turned to leave. A harmonious union, a vow to grow old together. How could that be? The heir to the Marquis of Xinyang already had an unspeakable beloved in his heart. In my past life, I only realized upon my deathbed why my always gentle husband had suddenly become a different person. The Marquis of Xinyang's household was just as impatient as in my previous life. The betrothal process, from the initial proposal and name inquiry to the divination, betrothal gifts, and setting the wedding date, had been completed step by step, leaving only the wedding ceremony itself. Just as in my previous life, Lady Mingli, the daughter of the Marquis of Xinyang, sent an invitation to our household, inviting both Wen Yang and me to a flower banquet at her residence. The only difference was that in my past life, Wen Yang, being a daughter of a concubine, was not included in the invitation, and she had always held a grudge about it. On the day of the banquet, Wen Yang went all out with her appearance, determined to redeem her past humiliation. But what did it matter? This time, it wouldn't be me marrying into that family. As soon as we entered the Marquis residence, we encountered Lady Qing of the Xinyang Marquis household. The original wife of the Xinyang Marquis had suffered a shock years ago and had been in a dazed state ever since, refusing to leave her quarters. Thus, the old Marquis took a second wife of equal status, who is the Lady Qing before us. Mingli is the daughter of Lady Qing, Lady Qing was skilled in social graces, showering Wen Yang and me with praise, and even took off 2 pairs of bracelets from her wrists to give to us. However, I knew that although the jade bracelets looked similar, the pair given to Wen Yang was actually part of Lady Qing's dowry. Mingli had asked for them for a long time, but Lady Qing never gave them to her. In my previous life, these bracelets didn't come into my hands until the 2nd day after the wedding. This time, they were given to me in advance. Seeing the displeased expression on Mingli's face, I understood. It seemed that in this life, Lady Qing and Mingli had already developed a rift over the heir, Mingzi. And this was an opportunity to suppress her. It seems that being reborn has indirectly changed many things. At the very least, in our previous life, they had always coexisted peacefully until after Mingzi and I got married. After bidding farewell to Lady Qing, Mingli took us to the garden to meet up with the other noble ladies. However, halfway there, a maid hurriedly approached. Mingli frowned slightly, apologized to us, and then left in a rush. The maid she left behind then continued to lead us to the garden. The garden was filled with young ladies from prominent and influential families in the capital. Given the Wen family's social standing, we were not on their level, so there was no one familiar to us, but these people were naturally sociable, knowing that Wen Yang was the future wife of the heir, so as soon as she entered the garden, someone came up to strike up a conversation. Wen Yang handled it with ease and soon blended in with them, leaving directly. As she was leaving, Wen Yang raised an eyebrow at me, looking quite pleased with herself. I pretended not to see it and walked away on my own. As the future wife of the heir, Wen Yang quickly became the center of attention. She was charming and sociable, smiling gracefully. The training from Madame Song had been remarkably effective. Just then, I caught a glimpse of Mingli's figure flashing by the garden entrance. As the head of the household, it was already strange for him not to appear at such a time, but it was even more peculiar that he arrived only to leave in a hurry. However, I also recalled something. In my previous life, around this time, an unexpected guest arrived at the Xinyang Marquis Manor. This matter was suppressed by Lady Qing and Mingzi together, so very few people knew about it. Coincidentally, after I married into the family later on, I overheard the heir mention it unintentionally while he was drunk. However, he was always guarded against me, so I never found out who this person was. From Mingzi's tone, I could only tell that he was deeply concerned about this individual. I can't pinpoint the exact time, but I know it was roughly around the period when I attended the banquet in my previous life. Seeing Mingli's current state, could it be happening today? I instinctively glanced at Wen Yang. Although she was surrounded by noble ladies, her eyes kept drifting toward me from time to time. A thought crossed my mind: why not take a chance and make Wen Yang earn Mingzi's displeasure ahead of schedule? So I deliberately paced around anxiously a few times to catch Wen Yang's attention, then stood up and left the banquet. As expected, Wen Yang followed me. With the big fish taking the bait, I walked briskly toward the front courtyard with light steps, slipping past the matrons guarding the flower hall. I led Wen Yang toward the nearby spot where arguing voices could be heard. Arriving at the door, relying on memories from my past life, I hid in a blind spot of the corridor nearby. Soon, Wen Yang, having lost track of me, appeared anxiously and was promptly drawn in by the sound of an argument. With a loud bang, a woman's startled cry followed, and Wen Yang smiled triumphantly before pushing the door open. The blind spot in the corridor was designed by the late Marquis of Xinyang. Allowing just a glimpse into the room, Wen Yang had thought she had caught me in some wrongdoing, but upon opening the door, she was met with the panicked faces of a man and a woman, and a person lying in a pool of blood on the floor. That pair of man and woman turned out to be Mingli and the heir, Mingzi. At that moment, their clothes were in disarray. Wen Yang took a few steps back in disbelief, then turned and ran. Mingli reacted swiftly, stepping forward and grabbing her by the hair. Wen Yan's scream snapped Mingzi out of his daze. With a quick chop of his hand, Mingzi struck her down, and Wen Yang collapsed limply. In my previous life, it was only at the very end that I learned that Mingzi, the heir of the Xinyang Marquis house, had feelings for his own legitimate sister, Ming Li, while Lady Qing harbored unspeakable emotions for the heir, Mingzi, after the old Marquis of Xinyang passed away. The already chaotic relationships within the Xinyang Marquis house became even more tangled. The only thing they all agreed upon was to have Mingzi marry me. On one hand, it was to cover up the truth, and on the other, to ensure Mingzi could smoothly inherit the title after marriage. As for the so-called benefactor and the jade pendant, it was nothing more than a scheme devised by their family to stay together for the long term. What they truly valued was my identity as the legitimate eldest daughter of the Wen family, who had lost her mother at a young age. Although their social status was slightly inferior, my mother was from the Qinghe Kui clan, And my father had just been promoted to the position of Vice Minister of Rights. He was gentle by nature and had no one to rely on, making him easy to manipulate, in my previous life, because of the jade pendant incident. I foolishly believed that Mingze had genuine feelings for me. After entering his household, I served my husband, attended to my mother-in-law, and managed the household affairs with meticulous care, always thinking twice before acting. Every time Mingze stayed in my room, the next day I would inevitably face harassment from Mingli and Madame Qing, but whenever I thought of how difficult it would be for Mingze to be caught in the middle, I endured it all, until in the end, I died of melancholy. The Wen family only saw the glamour on my surface, especially when Yang and my stepmother, every time they returned home, they would mock me both openly and covertly. Watching Mingze carry Wen Yang over his shoulder, the corner of my mouth lifted. I wonder if Wen Yang, who was so envious of my marriage into the Marquis's household in my previous life, would regret everything when she wakes up and finds out. Mingli stayed behind to tie up the person who had fallen to the ground. After handling everything, he locked the door and left. After all, there was still a banquet going on outside, and it wouldn't be right for the host to be absent for too long. Only after Mingli had been gone for quite some time did I emerge from my hiding spot, pull out the hairpin from my head, and quickly unlock the door. This lock-picking skill was something I had figured out in my previous life. When Mingze often locked me up, I never thought I'd use it again in this new life. As soon as I entered, I was hit by a strong smell of blood. I pinched my nose and looked over. The man was covered in blood, tied up tightly, and thrown on the ground, barely breathing. Could it be that he lived a quiet life in his previous existence because he died here? My heart skipped a beat, and I rushed over to check if he was still breathing. But as soon as I reached out, a cold, large hand grabbed mine. I was utterly terrified and instinctively tried to scream. But my mouth was quickly and firmly covered. "Don't make a sound, and I'll let you go," the man whispered in my ear. I quickly nodded, and only then did he release me. I stared at the person before me, my heart still racing. He, who had been tightly bound earlier, had somehow freed himself from the ropes and was now looking at me with a pair of beautiful phoenix eyes. The eldest daughter of the Wen family, the man had unknowingly blocked the door, leaving me with no way to escape. For the first time, I felt a pang of regret. Having been reborn only once, I had grown so arrogant as to dare pry into the secrets of the Marquis's household. I could have simply stayed away in this lifetime. But since things had come to this, I had no choice but to force myself to stay calm. "Do you know me? If my information is correct, you were originally supposed to be the future mistress of this Marquis manor." The person spoke without any reservation, making me wonder if they had also been reborn, but I couldn't tell from their expression, and they didn't give me a chance to probe further, continuing on their own. "Alright, no need to look at me like that. Since I've revealed your secret, for the sake of fairness, I'll tell you one of my secrets too." I don't. I instinctively opened my mouth to refuse. I am the true heir of this Marquis manor. For a moment, I felt like crying but had no tears left to shed. "I'm sorry. But I really don't want to know such a secret, at least not now, not at all. Miss Wen, you and I are now grasshoppers tied to the same rope. We must help each other more in the future." Even after returning to the banquet, the image of that shameless person still lingered in my mind. I gritted my teeth and slammed the teacup heavily onto the table in front of me, only to see Wen Yang returning, supported by a maid from Xinyang Marquis Manor. Her dress had been changed, and her makeup was more vibrant than before, but she looked utterly exhausted. Mingli quickly stepped forward, smiling as she pulled her to take a seat. Wen Yang instinctively shrank back slightly before then offering a greeting to Mingli. However, Mingli seemed to ignore such obvious distance. Just like when they first met before the banquet began, she affectionately held Wen Yan's hand, the two appearing as close as sisters. Mingli formally introduced the future wife of the Xinyang Marquis heir to the noble ladies present. And for a moment, the banquet became exceptionally lively. After the banquet ended, Mingli excused herself, saying she had something to discuss with Wen Yang, so I went ahead and boarded the carriage myself. I waited for a long time before finally seeing Wen Yang get into the carriage, although she still looked listless. As soon as the carriage moved away, she fiercely threw a teacup from the carriage's tea table at me. Did you already know about the dirty secrets of the Marquis's household in your past life?" The carriage compartment was cramped, and I couldn't dodge in time, getting drenched by the tea. "But so what, little sister? Have you forgotten? It was you who wanted to steal the jade pendant, and it was you who wanted to play the savior. What does any of this have to do with me?" I sneered. Wen Yang was so enraged that she immediately reached out with her long nails, aiming to scratch my face. I sternly stopped her. "Little sister, have you forgotten Nanny Song's teachings? Do you intend to brawl with your own sister right here in the street?" Only then did Wen Yang come to her senses, glaring at me fiercely. "Just wait until we return to the mansion, I'll make sure you learn your lesson." By the time they returned to the Wen residence, the lanterns were already lit. As soon as Wen Yang stepped out of the carriage, she headed straight for the main courtyard. Today was Wen Yang's first visit to the Xinyang Marquis's residence, and she knew her father and stepmother must be waiting anxiously. Wen Yang understood the concept of the villain striking first, but she had yet to learn the art of preemptive action. Once inside the residence, I tousled my own hair and scratched a few red marks on my arm. Just as I finished, Nanny Song, who had been worried about me, appeared on the path holding a lantern, looking at me with heartache. "Young lady, you." I smiled at her, signaling her to keep quiet. Nanny Song, a longtime servant, simply lowered her head and silently followed behind me with the maids brought from the Kui family. Before we even reached the main courtyard, I could hear my father's furious roars and Wen Yang's soft sobbing from inside. When I entered the room, my aunt was gently patting my father's back to help him calm down. Before I could even speak, I heard my father's voice. "You wicked girl, kneel down at once." I shot a glance at Nanny Song, signaling for her to wait outside, then walked into the flower hall and knelt straight down. The flower hall was brightly lit. Seeing me, my father was taken aback for a moment, then immediately furrowed his brows, his tone full of displeasure. "What's wrong with you now?" I timidly glanced up at Wen Yang, then quickly lowered my head, took out a handkerchief to wipe my tears, and remained silent. Wen Yang obviously saw my appearance at this moment as well. My hair bun was disheveled, tea dregs stained my clothes, and faint, slender red marks were visible on the back of my hand. Seeing that I remained silent, father turned to look at Wen Yang. Wen Yang instinctively shook her head. "Father, it wasn't me." Father looked at her suspiciously, and she spoke again. "Father, it really wasn't me, I only splashed tea on her." "Well done, I've been waiting for this." "Yes, father. My sister didn't do anything else, she just accidentally spilled tea on me," I sobbed. Who couldn't imitate the petty ways of a concubine? Wen Yang, relying on father and the concubine's favor, has always been domineering. Bullying me isn't a new thing, it's been going on for a long time. It's just that in the past, it happened within the mansion, and since I never cried or made a fuss, father was happy to turn a blind eye, but today was different. The two daughters of the household went to a banquet and returned, one weeping and wailing, the other in a pitiful state. "Father, you promised earlier that you would stand up for me." Seeing her father remain silent, Wen Yang stepped forward, took his hand, and began to act coquettishly. Yang mentioned that the relationships in the Hu Mansion's inner courtyard are quite complicated. "Are you aware of this?" Father asked me. "Does father actually believe what my sister said?" I looked at him in disbelief. Father somewhat uncomfortably averted his gaze. "After all, you are sisters, and you must support each other in the future. But father, have you ever considered that you are, as a young lady confined to the inner chambers, never stepping beyond the main gate or the second courtyard, only had the chance to attend the banquet this time because my sister is the future wife of the heir? When have I ever had any interaction with the Marquis's household in ordinary times?" My grievances burst forth all at once. Since childhood, father had always unconditionally believed Wen Yang, even when her words and actions were clearly full of holes. Father let out a long sigh, seeing his attitude softening. The concubine seized the moment to speak up. "The young lady's maternal family hails from the Qinghe Kui clan. Just as I was about to speak, Nanny Song entered at the perfect moment. She first bowed to father. If not for coming here to teach etiquette this time, this old servant would never have known that a mere concubine could bully the legitimate daughter of a vice minister's household in such a manner. The concubine's face instantly turned deathly pale, clutching her handkerchief tightly. Her body swayed as if about to collapse. When the lady passed away, the old madam wanted to take the young lady to raise by her side. But the master said he couldn't bear to part with this reminder of his wife, so it was dropped. All these years, we thought that with the master's steady rise in the court, the young lady must be living well. Who would have thought that in the short time since this old servant arrived, I've witnessed a concubine controlling the inner household and a secondary daughter suppressing the legitimate one. Lord Wen. Is this the proper order that should prevail in the residence of a vice minister of rights? Mother Song was an old servant who had followed the grandmother from the palace. Even the nobles in the palace would show her some respect. Her pointed question now left my father speechless. "Lord Wen, if the Wen residence cannot accommodate the young lady, then I must trouble you to grant permission for this old servant to take her back to the old madam's side when I return." Mother Song stood before me, neither haughty nor humble, her back straight, just as in my past life when she had done her utmost to shield me from the storms. In my past life, under the guidance of the concubine, I distanced myself from my grandmother. Whenever grandmother sent someone, I would respond indifferently and never took the initiative to write. Over time, I grew distant from the Kui family. I still remember before the wedding, my grandmother wrote to ask if I was willing. If not, she would definitely fight for me. But at that time, I was deeply immersed in the image of Mingzi that Mingli had crafted for me. His every word could stir my emotions for a long time. Although I felt a vague unease about their explanations, I suppressed the thought, filled with anticipation for the future as I awaited my marriage, and declined my grandmother's offer to send someone to investigate for me. My grandmother was very sad, but before the wedding, she still sent me her capable attendant, Nanny Song. The upright figure of Nanny Song before me now overlapped with her hunched form from my previous life when she collected my remains. My eyes were sore, and tears uncontrollably streamed down. What Nanny Song wanted to say was also what I wanted to express, but coming from her, it represented the Kui family's stance, which carried a completely different weight. However, in my father's eyes, this undoubtedly meant I tacitly agreed with Nanny Song's words. Or even that I had instructed her to speak on my behalf. My father was so angry that he immediately stormed off in a huff. When Yang quickly grabbed her aunt's sleeve, "Mother, I haven't finished speaking yet," but her aunt shook her head at her. When Yang could only glare at me resentfully, I wiped my tears with my sleeve and gave her a triumphant smile, nearly making her lose her temper on the spot. When Yang would certainly not let the matter rest, her wedding date was fast approaching. And not only was it impossible to change, but she was also unwilling to give up her position as the future wife of the heir. After all, once Mingzi inherited the title, she would be the undisputed marchioness. In her previous life, she had schemed tirelessly, even fighting Mingli's battles for her, only to barely secure the position of a secondary wife in the Marquis household. In this life, being able to marry into the family in this manner was already the best outcome she could have plotted. Even though she had discovered the filth in the Marquis household during her last visit, she would not easily give up. As for me, I merely sent her into that den of wolves, the Marquis household. How else could I repay the debt of my past life's death? I never expected that at this moment, I would actually see someone. This person was even bold enough to break into the Minister of Right's residence at night. I looked at the handsome man in front of me, utterly speechless, and couldn't help but feel a headache coming on. "This is the Minister of Right's residence, I know." The man casually sat down and poured himself a cup of tea. "I sent you a letter, but you never replied, so I came in person. In this life, I only want revenge on Wen Yang and my stepmother, then reclaim everything that belongs to me. I have no intention of getting involved with the Xinyang Marquis estate, so I prefer to keep my distance." That day, when he claimed to be the true heir of the Xinyang Marquis estate, it was enough to make me avoid him at all costs, but I never expected that he would brazenly come directly to my courtyard. "Don't shout, even if someone comes, I won't leave," the man said, "so if you call for help, you'll be the one at a disadvantage." I stared at him speechlessly, unable to believe there could be someone so shameless in this world. I couldn't help but feel a headache coming on. "What do you want?" "My name is Mingya," he said. "Sorry, I don't want to know." I turned my head away, but Mingya clearly had no intention of letting me off. "If you continue to ignore me, I'll tell Mingzi that you were originally the one meant to marry him." "Me, whatever, it's like talking to a brick wall." I turned around, planning to make do in the side room for the night. Who knew that as soon as I turned, the sound of something heavy hitting the floor came from behind me. Only then did I realize that Mingya's face was deathly pale. Clutching his chest, he sat on the ground with a bitter smile and said, "All right, I won't tease you anymore. You're the only person I know in the capital. Please help me." The one who injured Mingya was Mingzi. It turned out that ever since I helped Mingya escape from the Xinyang Marquis manor that day, Mingzi had been sending assassins after him. Tonight, Mingya infiltrated the manor again, only to fall into the trap Mingzi had long prepared. Mingya, wounded, fled. The Marquis of Xinyang's residence immediately reported to the authorities, falsely claiming that important items had been stolen from the estate. They also stationed guards at the city gates. With nowhere else to go, Mingya thought of me. The next day, news of the theft at the Marquis of Xinyang's residence spread throughout the capital. The portrait of the thief, drawn by the heir Mingzi, was unmistakably that of Mingya. Mingya was now a wanted man. When I told Mingya the news, he angrily punched the bed frame and cursed, "How despicable! You might as well make more noise and have someone send you to Xinyang Marquis's estate." I rolled my eyes. Mingya seemed to have been pinched at his vital point, instantly falling silent. But while this could deceive others, it couldn't escape Mother Song's notice. Mother Song didn't believe Mingya's story at all and immediately wanted to drag him to the authorities. Not to be outdone, Mingya declared dramatically that we had long been in love with each other. and if he died, I certainly couldn't live on alone. Then he winked at me. Seeing the murderous look in Nanny Song's eyes and fearing they might come to blows right then and there, I could only remain silent, waiting until Nanny Song had left the room before explaining everything. Fortunately, with Nanny Song's help, Mingya's supply of wound medicine was secured. Since Mingya was in my room, I had no choice but to feign illness and stay in bed. Who would have thought that upon hearing the news, Wenyang would, for the first time ever, decide to come and see me? It's hard not to be suspicious. I had just hidden Mingya in a secret compartment known only to me, and Wenyang arrived right after, even bringing Mingli along with her. As soon as they entered the room, they began looking around. Clearly with ulterior motives, Wenyang even asked me if I knew about the theft at the Marquis's residence and specifically mentioned Mingya, who is wanted. Clearly, they came for Mingya. In the past, they would have probably brought people directly to the door, but now, with the Kui family's presence, they seemed somewhat restrained. When Yang asked if I knew about the theft at the Marquis's residence, I shook my head, feigning disinterest. The two of them also found it dull and left not long after. After they left, I spotted an earring that had fallen on the floor where they had been sitting. So, this was the trap waiting for me. Well, the person I originally intended to arrange for my aunt will just have to be favored by Wenyang first. I immediately sent the items back, not giving them any chance to make a scene. When the maid came to report that Wenyang's expression was quite spectacular at that moment, I couldn't help but clap my hands and laugh heartily. The concubine doted on Wenyang so much that it resulted in her having a terrible temper. Without proper guidance, she ended up being somewhat scheming, but not very clever. At night, when I heard someone screaming from Wenyang's courtyard not far away, my heart felt even more delighted. Even if Wenyang hadn't come to provoke me, I wouldn't have let her off. Let alone now that she's delivered herself to my doorstep and even tried to set me up. When I hurriedly put on my clothes and rushed over, Wenyang was sobbing in my aunt's arms. My father was also standing by, fuming with anger. While a man on the ground was howling in pain. "Aunt, I don't know why I ended up here. Aunt, it's true, please save me." The man turned out to be my aunt's beloved nephew, whom she doted on second only to Wenyang. This wasn't what I had originally planned, and I felt puzzled. Just then, I sensed a scorching gaze directed at me. Following the feeling, I couldn't help but twitch my eyelids. There was Mingyi, clad in black night attire, hidden in the darkness, grinning as if seeking praise from me. So it was him who did it, but I don't know when he investigated the Wen family's affairs and precisely captured the concubine's nephew. Father was furious. Wenyang's wedding date had already been set, and she was soon to be married off. At such a critical moment, if this incident were to be discovered by the Marquis's household, the marriage might very well be called off. The concubine, observing father's expression, dared not plead for her nephew's sake and could only weep silently to herself, no longer able to attend to Wenyang. Wenyang, who had always been the center of the family's affection, naturally found this unacceptable. Despite having suffered such great injustice, her father and mother did not comfort her. Her father scolded her, and her mother was distracted by the very person who caused the trouble, yet she couldn't even vent her anger freely. All because this person was her cousin. Seeing that the person on the ground was gradually falling silent, only crying out when hit, I stepped forward and said, "Father, since Yanga is unharmed, let it go. If someone dies." My aunt also quickly knelt down to plead, "Yes, sir, there must be some misunderstanding." Father was in a fit of rage and naturally wouldn't let it go. As usual, the concubine knelt and shuffled over, tugging at his sleeve. Just as father's attitude seemed to soften, Wenyang refused to back down. A misunderstanding. What misunderstanding? He must have gambled and lost again, just like before, and came here to steal my gold and silver jewelry to pawn. Upon hearing this, father shook off the sleeve the concubine was holding. Losing her balance, she fell to the ground, and immediately, a stream of blood began to flow from beneath her. Someone, come quickly." And so, the matter was suppressed amidst the joyous news of the aunt's pregnancy. Watching my father and Wenyang's mother and daughter enjoying themselves harmoniously, I quietly slipped away. Soon enough, the harmony they share now will turn into deep-seated hatred in the future. Returning to my courtyard, I had just sat down when Mingya appeared opposite me. I never knew that Miss Wen was so venomous at heart. "What, are you scared? If you're scared, then leave. The door is right there. Don't let me keep you." I smiled at him, however. Mingya always took the unconventional path. He beamed back at me. "I'm not scared. In fact, I quite admire it. Miss Wen, the more I see, the more I feel you're well suited to be the future mistress of Xinyang Marquis Manor." I nearly choked on my tea with a phut sound, staring at him in horror. "Don't joke about things like that." Yet, Mingya's expression was unprecedentedly serious. I genuinely believe we are very compatible. Both of us want to reclaim what originally belonged to us. And we are willing to go to any lengths to achieve that. In essence, we are actually the same kind of people." I was speechless, indeed, but in this lifetime, I have no desire to enter the Xinyang Marquis manor. The experiences of my previous life were far too painful. By the time the concubine had stabilized her pregnancy, when Yang's wedding day was also fast approaching, before long, the physician declared that the concubine was carrying a son. My father was overjoyed and summoned me to his study. Saying he had important matters to discuss, I knew that the so-called important matter was nothing more than elevating the concubine to the status of legal wife. Father truly doted on the concubine, but it was pitiful how my mother, after being used to the fullest by him, ended up dying of melancholy. Every bit of affection and care father showed to the concubine and Wenyang was like a sharp blade stabbing into the hearts of my mother and me. In our past life, these blades wounded us beyond repair. But in this life, they have become the thorns I grow on the outside, wrapping around and protecting myself. Since Yaonyang is carrying a son, the position of a concubine is indeed no longer suitable. I've thought it over carefully. After all, this is the first male heir of the Wen family so far, and your only younger brother. We must certainly grant him a noble origin. Yua, why don't you write to your maternal grandmother and arrange for Yaonyang to have a status from a collateral branch of the Kui family? Over the years, she has taken meticulous care of you, managed the household finances, and kept your mother's dowry in perfect order. Even if there's no great merit, there's still hard work. My father spoke to me with earnest gravity. Moreover, with your brother having a noble background, it will only bring you countless benefits and no harm. Although I had schemed all along to reach this point, hearing my father's words still made my heart sink. Has father truly given this careful consideration? Has father forgotten how mother died? Back then, if it weren't for auntie's push, Yua would have had a younger brother long ago, and mother wouldn't have died of sorrow. Yet now, not only do you intend to elevate her to the position of principal wife, but you also want to give her the Kui family's status. Father, to kill a person and shatter their heart is no worse than this. Father's face turned pale, then he roared angrily, "How dare you, master? The young lady makes a valid point. Perhaps after the son is born, we could have him adopted under the wife's name." The concubine's eyes reddened as she stepped out from behind father, still maintaining her delicate and fragile appearance. "Miss, I really didn't mean it back then. All these years, I've been trying to atone for my mistakes. It's fine if you hate me alone, but the child in my belly and Yanga are your younger siblings. I beg you to take good care of them." Auntie used a retreat to advance strategy. Her words were beautifully spoken and struck a chord with father. Father reached out and pulled her into his embrace. "Yaonyang, you always consider me so thoughtfully. Rest assured, in my heart, no one can surpass you." I could no longer bear to listen to these words and interrupted them. "Since father just mentioned auntie managing the household affairs, I have something to say. Although mother's dowry list and the storeroom are in my hands, the farmlands and shops have always been managed by auntie. Now that auntie is pregnant, she should rest well. I have already come of age and have Nanny Song to guide me, so I believe managing mother's dowry shouldn't be a problem." When the aunt heard this, a trace of panic immediately appeared on her face. "What are you talking about? Yua, you're still a young lady. How can you handle these tedious account books? I know you mean well, but these really aren't important." I stared at the aunt with a strange expression. "When I was very young, my mother already taught me how to read account books. Besides, those were originally left to me by my mother, so they should naturally be managed by me." The aunt was momentarily speechless. "In that case, Yaonyang, sort them out and give them to her. Your health is what matters most now." Father thought for a moment before making a decision. When Yang couldn't sit still any longer, over the years, her aunt had been using the harvests from the fields and manors to support her, both openly and secretly. She quickly spoke up. "Father, I would like to manage them together with my sister." Father readily agreed. After reclaiming my mother's farmland and shops, I carefully examined them with the help of Nanny Song. Nanny Song immediately noticed many discrepancies. She told me that my mother's farmland and shops in the capital were all fertile lands and prosperous businesses, and with the support of the Kui family's trading company, there was no way they could have incurred such losses, let alone require selling shops to cover the deficits. Nanny Song was so furious that she wanted to rush off immediately to confront the concubine, but I stopped her. "Nanny, don't be hasty. I will take back everything, one by one." Seeing how confident I appeared, Nanny Song said nothing more and instead turned to send a letter to my grandmother. In the blink of an eye, when Yang's wedding day arrived, the Xinyang Marquis house showed the Wen family every courtesy. The Wen family lived up to expectations, providing a dowry of 128 chests. Everyone envied Wen Yang for marrying well, but on the day she returned to her parents' home, Mingzi did not accompany her. Despite her exquisite makeup, the exhaustion on Wen Yang's face was unmistakable. The moment she arrived home, she burst into tears with a loud wah. It turned out that as soon as the 128 chests of dowry arrived at the Xinyang Marquis residence, half of them ended up in the private coffers of Mingli and Lady Qing. Wen Yang naturally refused and immediately declined. However, the people she brought with her were completely restrained by the Xinyang Marquis's household. Unable to resist at all, she went to complain to the heir, Mingzi, but he was already impatient with her, having lost all the tenderness and affection he showed before their marriage. Wen Yang had thought of it as spending money to avoid disaster, but who would have thought that the very next day, Ming Li and Lady Qing would come to her door with unpleasant expressions. It turned out that the jewelry they had extorted from Wen Yang was either gold-plated or silver-plated, and some were even poor imitations or hollow inside. When Ming Li and Lady Qing wore the jewelry to a banquet, they were mercilessly mocked by a group of noble women and young ladies. They returned in a rage, throwing the jewelry at Wen Yang, and then tearfully complained to Mingzi. Wen Yang turned to Mingzi for help, but he only felt sorry for Lady Qing and Ming Li being laughed at. Poor Wen Yang didn't even know what had happened before Mingzi began to despise her. The aunt consoled Wen Yang while looking at me with reproach in her eyes. "Eldest miss, all of Yang's dowry was carefully prepared by me. I don't know why such a situation has occurred," I sneered. "Aunt, search your conscience. With the Wen families and your own finances, could you afford these 128 dowry chests for Wen Yang? I merely restored the original assets of the Wen family and yourself. You." Wen Yang flew into a rage. As she spoke, she reached out to claw at my face, but I lightly dodged, and she ended up grabbing at thin air. "Oh, by the way, Aunt, since we're being frank, I'll have Matron Song bring the bill to you later. After all, I couldn't possibly replace all 128 dowry chests, could I? The shortfall is quite substantial. If this isn't resolved soon, I'm afraid it might alarm grandmother." The aunt was so angry that she fainted on the spot. While things were going smoothly on my end, Mingya also kept sending me letters, each one bringing good news. On the day of Wanyan's grand wedding, as planned, I arranged for Mingya and his men to blend into the bridal procession and sneak in. They finally met the long-mad Marchioness. I congratulated Mingya on finally reuniting with the Marchioness, but in his letter, he asked me when I would be willing to marry him. I remained non-committal and did not reply. Soon, rumors began to fly all over the Marquis mansion. The love triangle between Mingzi, Mingli, and Madame Qing was exposed to the public. If you ask what the most popular story in the tea houses of the capital is these days, it's naturally the affairs of the inner chambers of the Xinyang Marquis mansion. When Yang finally managed to get pregnant, but Mingli pushed her down, causing her to miscarry and become permanently infertile, just as her own mother had done to my mother back in the day. As soon as she finished her confinement after the miscarriage, when Yang tearfully ran back home, clamoring for a divorce from Mingzi, her father, already overwhelmed by frequent impeachments related to the Xinyang Marquis mansion, had little patience for her behavior. He immediately sent someone to escort her back to the Xinyang Marquis mansion. When Yang refused to go, but was forcibly restrained by the maids and elderly servants, her mother went to comfort her, telling her that although the heir was currently unworthy, he would still undoubtedly become the Marquis of Xinyang in the future. The mother's intention was to ease Wen Yang's mind, but to her surprise, Wen Yang glared at her fiercely and said, "If it weren't for you constantly telling me to marry into a wealthy and powerful family, would I have ended up in this state, now that you have a son? Are you treating me as a discarded pawn?" That night, the mother was so enraged that she went into premature labor. However, when the midwife rushed over, the mother's belly had inexplicably deflated, leaving only a layer of soft, loose skin. There was no child to be found. The midwife screamed and fainted. Wen Yang's father hurried inside to check and saw the mother staring blankly at her own belly. Lost in thought, my father immediately sealed off the news and publicly claimed that my aunt had suffered a miscarriage. I quickly sent word out, and soon a popular story was circulating in the tea houses of the capital about a talented scholar who betrayed a noble lady and ultimately got his comeuppance. Indeed, how could my aunt be pregnant? I had simply given her a medicine that mimicked the symptoms of pregnancy. How could the Kui family, with its centuries-old heritage, lack such secret remedies of noble households? Since then, father no longer visited the concubine's courtyard, no matter how much she humbled herself. Soon, the Wen family welcomed a new concubine, and the old one turned grey overnight, calling out Wen Lang all day long. That courtyard quickly fell into neglect. aside from the necessary meals, no one visited the concubine who had been the center of attention in the Wen residence for over a decade. And this new concubine was a young Jew slim horse I had bought long ago, sent to him through one of father's retainers. I held her deed of sale and gave her a clean background. As long as she wasn't too foolish, she naturally obeyed my every word. Wen Yang, of course, refused to let it go and wanted to return home to seek justice for her mother. However, by then, father already had a new favorite by his side. Faced with this daughter who had married into the chaotic and disreputable Xinyang Marquis household, he showed not a hint of kindness. Later, he even ordered the servants to forbid her from setting foot in the house again. Wen Yang left with resentment, but before departing, she came to plead with me to look after her mother for the sake of our past affection. I sneered coldly. Affection? Have you forgotten that if it weren't for your mother, how could my own mother have died of sorrow? Wen Yang's face turned deathly pale, and she slunk back to the Xinyang Marquis manor in disgrace, and at this moment, the Xinyang Marquis manor was also like a storm brewing on the horizon. After their marriage, Mingzi submitted a petition to inherit the title of the Marquis of Xinyang as per custom, but he was consistently suppressed. Left with no choice, he went to seek help from his father. His father served as the Vice Minister of Rights and held some influence in the court. However, he was unaware that, had it not been for the disgraceful affairs of the Marquis of Xinyang's household dragging him down, his father would have been the most likely candidate to become the Minister of Rights after the former minister retired. But now, the highest position he could ever reach was that of Vice Minister of Rights. His father naturally had no kind expression for him, and even made a few sarcastic remarks. Mingzi returned home in a rage and, without a doubt, took his anger out on Wen Yang once again, having grown tired of watching the farce at Xinyang Marquis Manor, yet seeing no movement from Mingyi, I couldn't help but send a letter to inquire. However, Mingyi simply instructed me to accept Wen Yan's invitation a few days later and go to Xinyang Marquis Manor to observe. Moreover, to show his sincerity, he even sent 2 martial maidservants. I was surprised that Wen Yang still had the mind to send me an invitation, and then it arrived. Upon opening it, I saw it was for Madame Qing's birthday. The scandal surrounding the Xinyang Marquis's household had spread throughout the city, and they were in desperate need of a banquet to turn the situation around. I gladly accepted the invitation. The Xinyang Marquis's household had clearly put all their effort into preparing this banquet, and nearly every prominent family in the capital had been invited. However, almost everyone was there to watch the spectacle. I sat quietly in a secluded corner, watching the 3 people at the main table, Lady Qing, Mingli, and Wen Yang. Recalling the last banquet felt like a lifetime ago. Suddenly, someone sat down beside me. I turned my head and saw Mingyi, who had somehow made his way to my side. "Why are you here? Aren't you afraid Mingzi will send someone after you?" I whispered to him. He avoided the main point. "Are you worried about me? You're standing so close to me. I'm afraid you'll drag me down if you get chased down." I rolled my eyes at him in annoyance. Mingyi, however, fell silent, his gaze fixed intently on the 3 people seated in the main positions. While Lady Qing and Mingli were skilled in social interactions, Wen Yang sat there like a lifeless puppet doll, devoid of any vitality. Amidst the clinking of glasses and lively chatter, a sudden announcement of the Marquis's wife has arrived drew everyone's attention to a noble lady dressed in magnificent attire. I looked towards Mingyi, who had a smile at the corner of his mouth as he glanced back at me and winked. It seemed that the Xinyang Marquis Manor was about to undergo a major upheaval today. Everyone present began whispering among themselves, with a hint of anticipation in the air. With just a light wave of her hand, the Marquis brought the entire hall to silence. She turned her gaze towards Lady Qing, her eyes filled with authority. "I have feigned madness for 16 years, all for this day. Now that my son has returned safely, it is time for everyone to learn the truth." Lady Qing collapsed straight to the ground, but Mingli was quick to react, shouting, someone, fetch the heir, that imposter." The Marchioness sneered at Mingli. "He's likely already been subdued by my son and is being escorted to the imperial prison as we speak." The long-hidden secrets of the Xinyang Marquisate were exposed. The old Marquis of Xinyang was licentious and cared only for beauties. The Marchioness was the wife chosen for him by his family, but she never earned his respect. Later, he met his true love, Lady Qing, who was ambitious and sought only power. On the night the Marchioness gave birth, she sent the old Marquis away and replaced the child with a baby boy, intending to control him with this secret once he grew up. However, the Marchioness, after all, came from a noble family and had long been fully prepared. She did not want to raise her child in such an environment, so she took the opportunity to send the child away. This child was Mingyi. While she herself feigned madness and went into seclusion, pretending to have been traumatized by childbirth. The entire audience was in an uproar, never expecting that the Xinyang Marquis estate had such a hidden story. For a moment, the previous romantic scandals seemed insignificant in comparison. In the end, the Marchioness publicly read out the emperor's decree. Mingya stepped forward, received the imperial edict, and officially inherited the title of Marquis of Xinyang. It was a happy ending for all. Everyone present congratulated the Marchioness on her hard-won happiness and Mingya's succession to the title, and I quietly slipped away. The Wen residence was now under my control, and all those who had harmed me in my previous life had been punished. Standing at the entrance of the Xinyang Marquis Manor, for a moment, I felt somewhat dazed. The sky suddenly began to drizzle, and since the Wen family's carriage was parked quite far away, the maid beside me went to summon the coachman to bring the carriage to the manor's entrance. However, shortly after the maid left, I suddenly felt an overwhelming urge to stand in the pouring rain, but as soon as I stepped outside, someone immediately followed with an umbrella. "I've been looking for you for so long. Why are you here?" Mingya asked, completely oblivious to the situation. I rolled my eyes. "Mingya, do you know why I hate you?" "Mingya, why? You've always been in a high position, accustomed to ordering people around. Even when you lower your posture, you still act superior." "I will change." Mingya pursed his lips. "No need to change." I shook my head at him. "Because, no matter what, you and I will never be the same kind of people. Pleasure working with you, Lord Hu, wishing you all the best in the days to come." I waved to Mingya and ran into the rain, my heart filled with anticipation for the future.